A socialite tears a black waitress's dress at a high society gala, hurling racial slurs, thinking no one will stop her. She doesn't know the waitress is married to the billionaire hosting the event, and he's about to arrive. Boston's glittering elite sipped champagne beneath chandeliers, unaware that their privilege was about to backfire. Vanessa Whitmore, socialite extraordinaire, tore at Brielle Collins's dress, spewing venom. She thought she was attacking a powerless waitress. She didn't know Brielle was a $200 million tech entrepreneur, and every word was being recorded. Vanessa Whitmore's life was a carefully curated performance. Each charity gala was another stage where she could display her relevance, her connections, her place in a world that whispered behind closed doors about her family's declining fortune. The Whitmore name still opened doors, but everyone knew Richard's real estate empire was what paid for the designer gowns and the summer house in the Hamptons. Tonight's event, Marcus Collins's annual tech philanthropy gala, was her chance to be photographed with Boston's new money, to prove she still mattered. 3 weeks earlier, Brielle Collins had sat across from her husband at their breakfast table, watching morning light paint gold across his worried face. "You're sure about this?" Marcus had asked, his hand covering hers. "You know I can't watch you be treated like I'm invisible." Brielle finished. "That's exactly the point." She'd been planning this research for months, ever since her former MIT classmate had broken down describing the racism she'd faced working as a hotel concierge while finishing her PhD. These people perform progressiveness at fundraisers, then treat service workers like props. "I need to document the gap between what they claim to believe and how they actually behave when they think no one important is watching." Marcus had finally agreed on one condition: he'd be watching from the gallery. If things went too far, he'd intervene. Now, wearing a simple black uniform with a white apron, Brielle moved through the ballroom like a ghost. Her $200 million AI startup had made her one of the youngest self-made tech entrepreneurs in the country, but tonight she was invisible. And invisibility, she was learning, revealed everything. The collision happened near the champagne fountain. Brielle had been balancing a tray of crystal flutes when Vanessa turned sharply, sending glasses crashing to the marble floor. Before Brielle could apologize, Vanessa's fingers closed around the neckline of her dress. The sound of tearing fabric cut through Vivaldi's Four Seasons. White feathers from the dress's delicate trim floated downward like snow, settling on shards of broken crystal. Vanessa's face twisted with something beyond anger. It was the pure, unleashed rage of someone who'd been looking for a target all evening. "You clumsy," the word that followed made several nearby guests flinch. But no one moved. No one intervened. Instead, they formed a circle. Vanessa's friend Margot stepped closer, her Chanel clutch held like a shield. James Thornton, a hedge fund manager, positioned himself to block the view from the main entrance. Another couple moved in, creating a human wall that transformed a public assault into a private show. This was the most damning part, Brielle thought, even as humiliation burned through her chest. Not just Vanessa's hatred, but the crowd's silent permission. These were people who posted black squares on social media, who donated to racial justice organizations, who would swear under oath they weren't racist. Yet here they stood, forming a protective barrier so a white woman could degrade a black woman without consequence. Brielle kept her eyes down, her posture submissive, her hands trembling slightly. The small camera pin on her torn collar captured everything, every face, every silent nod of complicity, every person who chose to enable rather than interrupt evil. "Can you even read?" Vanessa's voice dripped with performed concern, the kind that masked cruelty as curiosity. She snatched a gala program from a nearby table and thrust it toward Brielle. "Here. Read this. Go on. Prove you're not as stupid as you look." The crowd leaned in, hungry for humiliation. This was entertainment for them, a break from the boring speeches about digital equity and inclusive innovation. Brielle took the program with shaking hands, noting how several guests exchanged knowing smirks. They'd already decided how this would end. Brielle began reading in a clear, steady voice. Tonight's keynote address will be delivered by Dr. Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, founder of the Rousseau Foundation for Educational Access. She paused, then looked directly at Vanessa. You mispronounced his name earlier, by the way. It's Rousseau, not Rousseau. He's been quite clear about that in interviews. The first crack appeared in Vanessa's composure, a slight tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible step backward. Someone in the circle coughed. Margot suddenly found her phone fascinating. Continue, Vanessa snapped, but her voice had lost its certainty. Brielle read the entire program flawlessly, including the French menu selections and the Latin motto of the hosting foundation. When she finished, she handed the program back with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Is there anything else you'd like me to prove, ma'am? The silence that followed was different now, not complicit, but uncomfortable. Vanessa's performance was failing, and everyone could sense it. Her face flushed red as she realized she'd lost control of her own show. Brielle's fingers moved to her collar, ostensibly to assess the damage to her dress. In reality, she was adjusting the hidden camera pin, angling it to capture Vanessa's face in perfect high-definition clarity. The movement was practiced, subtle, something she'd rehearsed a dozen times in her home office while Marcus watched with growing apprehension. Inside her mind, the analytical engine that had built a tech empire was cataloging everything. Vanessa's micro-expressions, the flared nostrils indicating genuine rage, not performance. The crowd's body language, Margot's slight lean away suggesting moral discomfort overridden by social loyalty. James Thornton's crossed arms and planted feet indicating he'd made a conscious choice to stay and enable rather than leave and disrupt. This was gold for her research. Chapter 3 of her book would analyze how educated, wealthy liberals could simultaneously espouse anti-racist values while actively participating in racist cruelty. The cognitive dissonance required was fascinating from a psychological perspective, even as it was devastating from a human one. She noted the exact words Vanessa used, not just the obvious slurs, but the paternalistic, "can you even read," the assumption of illiteracy, the equation of service work with intellectual inferiority. Every phrase was a data point illustrating how systemic racism manifested in supposedly progressive spaces. The pin's memory card was recording everything in 4K. Later, her team would transcribe not just the words but the tones, the pauses, the moments of collective silence that spoke as loudly as any slur. This wasn't just evidence of one woman's racism, it was documentation of a system. Marcus Collins had been gripping the gallery railing so tightly his knuckles had turned white. From above, he'd watched his wife, his brilliant, composed, impossibly strong wife, endure humiliation that made his blood boil. He'd promised Brielle he'd let her complete her research. He'd promised he wouldn't intervene unless she gave him the signal. But watching Vanessa tear Brielle's dress, hearing the slurs echo through the ballroom his company had rented, seeing the crowd's complicit circle, the promise became impossible to keep. He descended the grand staircase with deliberate slowness, each footfall on marble echoing through the ballroom like a judge's gavel. Conversations died in expanding ripples. The string quartet faltered, then stopped. By the time Marcus reached the bottom step, every eye in the room had turned toward him. Marcus Collins at 42 was Boston's most successful tech entrepreneur of the decade. His AI-driven climate modeling software had made him a billionaire by 35. His face had been on the cover of Forbes, Wired, and Time. He'd been courted by 3 presidential campaigns and had turned them all down. When he entered a room, people noticed. But tonight, his presence carried a different weight. This wasn't the charming host of a philanthropic gala. This was a man who just witnessed his wife being assaulted, and the cold fury in his dark eyes promised consequences. He crossed the ballroom floor, his path cutting directly through the circle that had formed around Brielle. People scattered like leaves before a storm. Only Vanessa remained frozen, her face still flushed with righteous anger, oblivious to the shift in power that had just occurred. "That's my wife you just assaulted." Marcus's voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the ballroom with absolute clarity. For words that detonated like a bomb in the center of Boston's elite society. Vanessa's face underwent a transformation that would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. Triumph melted into confusion, confusion into dawning horror, horror into desperate denial. That's not, she's a waitress, this is some kind of. Her name is Dr. Brielle Collins, Marcus continued, his voice still dangerously calm. PhD in computer science from MIT. Founder and CEO of Meridian AI. Currently worth approximately $200 million. And the woman you just physically assaulted while calling her, he paused, letting the weight of the slurs hang in the air, those words. The ballroom had become a vacuum. People stood frozen, phones already out, recording everything. Brielle watched Vanessa's world collapse in real time, each second stretching into an eternity of realization. I was trying to meet her all night, Vanessa whispered, her voice breaking. Just 3 hours earlier, she'd cornered Marcus at the bar, gushing about how she'd love an introduction to the famous Brielle Collins, how she'd read every article about her success story, how inspiring it was to see a woman of color breaking barriers in tech. Marcus turned to his wife, his expression softening as he took in the torn dress, the feathers still caught in her hair, the composed mask she wore over her pain. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Brielle nodded, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. She held it out to Vanessa with steady fingers. "For your lawyer," she said calmly. "You're going to need one." The first video hit Twitter at 11:47 p.m., shaky phone footage capturing the moment Vanessa tore Brielle's dress, the audio crystal clear. By 1:15 a.m., it had 2 million views. By 3:30 a.m., hashtag Vanessa Whitmore was trending nationwide alongside hashtag Brielle Collins and hashtag EliteRacism. News outlets picked it up by dawn. CNN ran it during morning broadcasts. The Boston Globe's website crashed from traffic. Think pieces started appearing before most of Boston had finished their coffee, the racism hidden in progressive spaces, when charity galas mask bigotry, the assault that revealed Boston's elite hypocrisy. Vanessa woke to discover her social media accounts flooded with thousands of messages, none of them sympathetic. Her Instagram followers were dropping by the hundreds every minute. By noon, the prestigious Commonwealth Club had revoked her membership. By 2 p.m., the Museum of Fine Arts had removed her from their board of trustees. By 4 p.m., 3 charities she chaired had issued statements severing all ties with her. Margot Hastings posted a carefully worded statement on Instagram: "I was present at an incident last night that I deeply regret not stopping. I apologize for my silence and complicity." The post included a donation receipt to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, her attempt at public penance that fooled no one. Richard Whitmore's phone rang constantly, investors, board members, business partners all demanding to know how he planned to handle the situation. His real estate company's stock dropped 3 points. 2 major deals fell through before sunset. By midnight, Vanessa Whitmore had transformed from Boston socialite to national symbol of racist entitlement. Her name would forever be associated with that moment, fingers tearing fabric, mouth twisted in rage, caught forever in high-definition clarity. Richard Whitmore filed for divorce on Thursday morning, exactly 6 days after the gala. The paperwork was delivered to Vanessa by a process server who found her hiding in their Beacon Hill brownstone, curtains drawn against the protesters outside. The divorce filing was brutal in its honesty. Richard's lawyers had crafted a document that cited irreconcilable differences stemming from a pattern of discriminatory behavior I can no longer ignore or enable. They included dates, examples, incidents Richard had witnessed and dismissed over their 15-year marriage. The time Vanessa had complained about their daughter's black teacher. The dinner party where she'd questioned whether their black neighbors had actually earned their Harvard degrees. The country club conversation where she'd referred to Obama with language Richard had tried to forget. "I've been complicit in your racism through my silence," the statement read. That ends now. The financial consequences were devastating. The prenuptial agreement Richard's lawyers had insisted on years ago gave Vanessa minimal support given her own family's wealth that had largely evaporated in bad investments her father had made before his death. She'd been living on Richard's money for a decade, and now that lifeline was severed. The Beacon Hill brownstone would be sold. The Hampton summer house was Richard's separate property, acquired before the marriage. Vanessa's settlement would give her enough to rent a modest apartment in a less prestigious neighborhood, enough to survive but not enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd built her identity around. She read the papers alone in the echoing brownstone, surrounded by furniture that would soon belong to someone else, and finally understood the true cost of her hatred. She hadn't just lost a husband, she'd lost her entire world. 6 months later, Brielle Collins stood at a podium in the Kennedy caucus room, addressing the Senate Committee on Civil Rights. Behind her, a screen displayed the viral video, a moment now studied in sociology courses and corporate diversity trainings across the country. Her book, Invisible: How America's Elite Hide Their Racism, had debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for 12 weeks. The viral video was Chapter 1, but the book was so much more, a comprehensive analysis of how educated, progressive identifying individuals could harbor and act on deep racial prejudice while maintaining a self-image of tolerance. Universities assigned it. Corporations hired Brielle to train their executives. She'd appeared on 60 Minutes, The Daily Show, and Fresh Air. Her TED Talk had 40 million views. The research she'd conducted in that one painful evening had transformed into a national conversation about the racism that hid behind progressive politics and philanthropic galas. Marcus and Brielle had established the Invisible Voices Foundation, funding hidden camera research into discrimination in elite spaces, hotels, exclusive clubs, high-end retail. The work was controversial but effective, resulting in policy changes and criminal charges in multiple states. Vanessa Whitmore watched the Senate testimony from a studio apartment in Malden, streaming C-SPAN on her laptop. She'd been charged with assault and battery, received probation, and completed court-mandated community service at a homeless shelter where she'd been required to be supervised by black staff members. She watched Brielle speak with calm authority about systemic racism, watched senators lean forward to catch every word, watched the woman she tried to destroy testify about transforming pain into power. And finally, too late, but finally, Vanessa understood. Brielle Collins had always been untouchable, not because of her husband's wealth or her own success, but because she possessed something Vanessa never had, the strength to turn hatred into justice, and the vision to change the world.